Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
We are back after probably the longest summer hiatus we've taken. I'm glad. I hope the listeners have stuck with us, but I'm certainly grateful for it and had a great time. But want to hear from...
Probably not. It's like all those people who are never coming back to church. Same sort of thing.
Aren't they?
Sayonara.
That's right.
You turn off the faucet of content and they just
God, I hope
off.
that's not true, but continue.
Me too.
Well, how was the hiatus? How's the summer been?
Content.
I made you some sweet content.
Sweet content.
Sarah, let's start with you. What's new?
I mean, still sad.
So comforting. Some things
still
never
sad.
change.
Yeah, but a really good summer. It was really nice. We settled into our little getaway house in Oxford, and that was just amazing because life is very simple there. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's not simple if you live there full time, but for our purposes, it was very simple. Our kids could like walk around the corner and go to a little art camp and walk around the other corner and buy donuts. So it was really sweet. And yeah, we got to see a lot of family. I have this incredible niece, and her dad runs a restaurant and bartends, and her mom is a pharmacist, and she's 18 months old. So they're like running in opposite directions constantly. So I got to keep her, which was so special. So yeah, it was good. It was really good. Went to Oregon with my brother and future sister-in-law, which was really nice. You know, my brother and I, Aaron, we grew up doing a lot of like big family vacations together. Mm-hmm. Where our mom would like aggressively wake us up at 6:30 in the morning and basically make us eat so much at breakfast that we didn't have to eat lunch, so we could just keep going and seeing things. So yeah, felt a little rebellious to like sleep in and like have wine at lunch.
Didn't you send us a photo of you guys on the Goonies beach? Like the
We did the whole we did the whole thing. So
it was your time out there.
It was your time
out there.
It was. And we also did Dollywood with our really, really good friends. That was, I have to say, like, don't sleep on Dollywood. Like, if you think you're going to some like silly theme park, you are. And also, it's very well kept up. There are incredible, really hokey, oh my God, the shows are just from another planet. And you'll see photos of Dolly's family, like, and you've never seen a 70s wedding till you've seen photographs of like Dolly's family in 70s weddings. The amount of like layered hair that men had in those photographs with like powder blue. I mean, suits. Anyway, it was feathered. It was feathered. It's just these like layers of hair, and the women are dressed like 70s antebellum, like, you know, nothing about it is PC. You know, it was just, my daughter, our 7-year-old, was just like, I would like to move here. Do they have an
pictures
internship?
of her? They're so amazing. It just warmed my heart. I actually put it on some of the Mockingbird social media because people have been rooting for this.
It was so
Dollywood
good.
pilgrimage.
It was really good. So,
Rutger, what about you?
Good summer. Good time up in the mountains with my family, and then also some of my extended family, which was really fun. So swimming and cliff jumping and rapid riding and, you know, all that kind of adventure type stuff. And then Jamie and I had the chance to take a couple fun little trips for a wedding I did, and I was invited to preach somewhere. So that was nice just to have time for the two of us. And now, blessedly, everyone is back in school, which is just amazing. Although Marshall only had a half day today. Tomorrow's full day, thank God. Mm-hmm. It was good. I will say right at the moment, 4 members of my wife's family have COVID, and
Oh.
two of them are hospitalized.
Oh, RJ.
And this past week has been rough, and she spent a lot of time on the phone with family, and then also taking your oldest son back to college is always a little bit, that can be difficult as well.
Yeah.
So things have been a little intense the past week, but we had a good summer, and heading into fall, which we all thought would be normal, and is not normal.
Well, I've spent most of the summer trying to write a book, and it's coming along. It's not where it needs to be, but there has been some moments of inspiration, which have been great. And then we traveled a bunch. I was writing while we were on the road, but just got back from Michigan, from northern Michigan, where I was teaching at a Camp Arcadia, which is just like the most beautiful spot. That I didn't grow up with any sense that northern Michigan was a place people went to vacation, but it is just
the UP
glorious, and it feels very underdeveloped. So hopefully, now that they've heard the Mockingcast, it's going to just explode. But like you guys, the transition.
All this clergy with all that money for secondary housing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like you guys, the transition back to fall and all the moving pieces is super intense. It's just we're recording on the second day of school for my kids, and I think it's going well. I don't know. It's things are changing by the second. So, how's the transition back been, Sarah?
Oh, my middle schooler joined the soccer team, so he has to run for like 4 or 5 hours every week. Just they're like, get him out there and move him. And I've never seen him so happy. So it's been really good. I'm just like, you can cancel school, do not cancel soccer. Okay. These are the rules. We have to at least have this.
So like all boats rise when Neil's getting more energy out.
Oh yeah. He's our canary in the coal mine. So yeah. Yeah, I honestly like it, like RJ, it's pretty miraculous when suddenly you have total silence and can get things done. So, and you're not like feeding people constantly. So,
well, RJ, I'm sorry to hear about Jamie's family. That is, it's scary.
It is scary.
It is.
Well, let's jump in. We got a lot of great things to talk about today. I sort of cherry-picked some of my favorite articles from while we were gone, and the first one is this is by Amanda Mull in The Atlantic, who wrote that American shoppers are a nightmare. Like if one of the aviation administrations reported that less than 6 months into 2021, airlines had reported more unruly passengers than in any full year since it began collecting data.
Wow.
A Southwest flight attendant lost 2 teeth after a passenger punched her in the face. A Delta flight had to be diverted after a passenger threatened to take the plane down. United is offering only lower alcohol options such as beer and wine and only on longer flights. But Mull says that the flight attendants are merely the tip of the service work iceberg. Throughout the pandemic, as you know, videos of irate customers screaming, whether it's about masks or throwing things or assaulting employees at big box and grocery stores, they've become like a social media mainstay. And as Americans return en masse to in-person commerce, the situation only appears to be getting worse. I didn't realize that what happened at Trader Joe's, where 8 people were injured recently. Short-fused shoppers becoming verbally abusive and otherwise degrading over slow service or sold-out goods is becoming quite a thing. She goes on to sort of go a little bit more bigger picture. She says the experience of buying a new television or a double cheeseburger in a store has gotten worse in your lifetime. It's gotten worse for the people selling TVs and burgers, too. The most immediate culprit is decades of cost cutting. As wages and resources dwindle, more expensive and experienced workers get replaced with fewer and more poorly trained hires. When customers can't find anyone to help them or have to wait too long in line, they take it out on whichever overburdened employee they eventually hunt down. Now, for Americans in a socially isolating culture, the consumer realm is the place where many people can most consistently feel as though they are asserting their agency. Most people in the United States don't exactly have a plethora of opportunities to develop meaningful identities outside their economic station. Creative and athletic pursuits are generally cut off when people enter the workforce. Fewer people attend religious services than in generations past. And loneliness and alienation are widespread. This is not a feature of a healthy society. Even before the pandemic pushed things further to extremes, the primacy of consumer identity made customer service interactions particularly conflagratory. Being corrected by a salesperson, forgotten by a bartender, or brushed off by a flight attendant isn't just an annoyance. For many people, it is an existential threat to their self-understanding. I mean, I'd seen a lot of these videos of people yelling and jumping over the counters to
Losing their mind on the flight.
or losing their mind at the McDonald's or something like that. But I hadn't put it two and two together that the experience of shopping as well as the experience of service work is really combustible right now.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys seen this? What do you think?
I mean, recently I was at my favorite smoothie place, and on the app they advertise that pumpkin smoothies are out, but then you can't order them on the app. And so I definitely complained to the powerless 19-year-old behind the counter about their app. So before we launch into talking about people being crazy, I want to say that I'm sure I swam in a percentage of that sort of ire. Because when I said it to her, and she was like, I don't have anything to do with the app. I was like, oh, yeah, gosh, I'm that person right now. Cool. About a pumpkin smoothie, I'm that person. So that's great.
That was the first bad choice there. Pumpkin smoothies. I should not. Sorry. It's your first mistake.
It's fall here, RJ. It's only 97 degrees.
Exactly.
Yeah, one thing we talk about a lot at home right now is when we go out to eat, we need to lower our expectations of what that experience will be like because we've seen all the signs. We saw them a lot when we were in Tennessee on vacation about everyone is understaffed. No one wanted to show up for work today. And so knowing things are going to take longer and that they may not have what you want it's an interesting experience as an American who's always gotten what she wanted. You know, I'm like, like this is okay. Like one more thing is falling apart. Okay.
We had that too. Like where you go to a restaurant and they're like, oh, it'll be a 20-minute wait. And you're like, but you're only half full.
Right.
How can it be a 20-minute wait when you're half full? You know, and they're like, oh, because nobody is here.
Yeah.
And we're operating this entire place with 3 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was an interesting podcast I was listening to about people quitting, and they interviewed a waitress.
This
Did
American
you hear
Life.
this?
I was going to mention
American
that.
Life. Yes. And she talked about, she was somebody who really, I think, loved service work, had always wanted to be the kind of waiter at a high-end restaurant that got a great tip. And there were 2 things that really struck me. One was that one of the patrons left her, with the tip, she wrote a note on the receipt that said, thank you for making this feel normal, or thank you for giving us a normal night. And it just made the waitress irate because she's like, nothing about this is normal. So it was like this woman trying to leave something lovely, and it really hit her
and
in
I'm
a
risking
way.
my life. I'm risking my life to give you 1 hour of normalcy.
Right. Yeah. And then,
as an
of course,
essential worker.
The other thing that hit me was that often when people were going to tip her, they would ask her to lower her mask to see how pretty she was.
What?
Yes.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God.
I mean, I can imagine people thinking that, but actually doing
Can
it?
you? I'm just like, it was.
There were
kind of
worse things than that in
mind-boggling.
that podcast. Yeah. I felt bad for that.
No,
girl.
I had the experience the other night. We went out to dinner for one of my son's birthdays, and it was a nice place, and we sort of built it up as being great, and then they were out of like 3 things, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, come on, part of me is like, I'm rooting for you guys. I really want this to work out.
Did they have pizza, Dave? Did they have pizza?
RJ, just you know where to go. It was a Brazilian restaurant, so I was looking for some yuca fries, and they had clearly not gotten any yuca fries.
Wow.
So thank you, RJ, for making me feel
Only unlimited meat.
Only unlimited meat, exactly.
But it's not only the entitlement that comes through, but the expectation and the people. So there's the compassionate side of everyone's dying for some normalcy. Everyone wants to have a nice time. And,
yes.
And what do we call this? The hot vax summer or something like that. That there was.
Right.
We got this teasing this summer of like
Waxed and waxed.
Waxed and waxed. Oh my goodness.
I know I'm the only one that can say it, and it has to be said.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said it.
I found
welcome.
myself definitely giving larger tips for whatever that's worth. Not because I'm more sanctified, but because
Yes.
well, it is because I'm more sanctified. Let's face it.
I mean, there's an interesting thing as a Christian because she gestures in this way to this idea about people not having basically religious institutions, and there is like a way that we function in the world, God willing, as Christians in our better moments, where there's a message of grace there that's both like. I mean, I had a horrible grief weekend this past weekend. Horrible. It was so bad. I did not go to church on Sunday morning. I took my kids to the pool, and afterwards Josh was like, we're going out to a nice Italian lunch. And we did, and honestly, I feel that energy that woman wrote on the receipt of like, thank you for giving me a normal experience and a frozen peach Bellini, but also there's this experience as Christians of just grace. And it's always that inconvenient grace where you are like, these people are kind of doing the best they can. And like, this wasn't the experience I wanted, but like, you know what? It's not all about me. And like, I should probably tip them a little more, even though they didn't have my yucca fries, like, I mean, it's both, right?
Yeah, I know. RJ, what does this bring up for you?
Well, we did quite a bit of flying this summer between, vacation and some work stuff and getting our kids, getting our son back to college. And a lot of it was like a total nightmare, I have to say. Like my oldest son spent like 18 hours in Chicago O'Hare, which was awful. And we couldn't figure out how to get him home because there was a rainstorm, but there was also a shortage. And it was just, It was very, very stressful. One day, Jamie and I were supposed to fly somewhere. We woke up one day and they changed our flights. And anyway, and again, that's such a first world problem. And yet so many people hate to fly, and the idea of being trapped in an airplane with nowhere to go when the air conditioning might not work, especially if you can't have like a little glass of white wine to take the edge off, is a total nightmare. And so I feel for people on both sides of the thing, especially when it really does become something that like flying, that traps you in a space where you can't get out if you struggle with things like claustrophobia, so I get that. And then I was totally going to bring up the waitress also in This American Life, because she talked about it powerfully. But the line in the article that got me was, what did it say? The pandemic has shown just how desperately the consumer class, aka everyone, well, not everyone, a lot of people, how desperately
for sure.
Yeah, for us for sure. How desperately the consumer class clings to the feeling of being served.
Oh.
And that's so true, right? That when you just when you don't feel like cooking and you just need like a night off and you can afford to go to a restaurant, you want to go and be served and have it be easy and not eat what you want and not have to do dishes. And it reminded me, but I think it's true. I think it's true on every level, because I remember in Nickel and Dimed, Barbara Ehrenreich went to go work at like Walmart for a little while. And she said basically her entire life was just picking up stuff because people would walk in and there was something freeing about like checking someone out and then just dumping it somewhere and not having to fold it and put it away and take care of it, just sort of discarding with it. That we all have spaces in our life where we want to go and kind of make a mess and have someone else take care of it. That's part of American culture, I think, from top to bottom. So
isn't that Jerry Seinfeld always said that there's an unspoken agreement with movie theaters that if I'm going to pay, $10 for a thing of popcorn, I also reserve the right to leave it completely scattered on the ground when I go.
Yes, or like a sporting event, or like anything, anything like that. I'm sure that's probably true of church too. Like, I'm going to go and I'm just going to leave my book strewn around and my worship bulletin. I'm going to do whatever I want, and somebody's going to come along after me and clean it up. But Sarah, I think you're right. Just it certainly has been a time to learn about patience, not getting what we want, to reconcile with how much we look to other people to kind of serve us, how much we expect that.
I think it's
a little bit. Yeah,
it's sort of interesting. I mean, I always think of clergy or people in ministry who, it's in most settings, it's unclear whether or not or there are certain settings where it's unclear whether or not you are part of the group that you were ministering to, or you are their servant, or you're their help. And especially people, go to vacation places and there's a little chapel and someone serves there for a little bit, and you get to pretend like you're part of the, I don't know what it is, Jackson, Wyoming, a crowd, but at the same time, you're also expected to show up on Sundays and sort of do the bidding in a way. I mean, it's a life of service, which I think is something that is not news to anyone who goes into ministry. But there's a slight awkwardness about the status that is, you put you in a different place than someone who is, cleaning houses or serving food. The other thing I want to say is, I don't know if I told the story before, but I used to help run tours in Europe of Reformation sites. Have I talked about this before?
No.
Yeah, I did it for a bunch of it's usually for...
You're like 80.
I did it for...
you had so many fascinating...
Well, because Dave also speaks fluent German. He lived in Germany for a while, so he's like the perfect person.
I was hired to do because I could speak German, and so he's like usually American Christians who would go on these tours, it was semi-pilgrimages, and it'd be sponsored by a group. And one year, sometimes it was like Episcopalians, and sometimes it was Presbyterians, and sometimes it was Baptists, and sometimes it was Notre Dame, the Catholics, and then one time it was the board of directors of Wheaton College.
Wow.
So very, very capital E evangelical. Lots of very sweet people, a few people that were maybe not as sweet, and it was a mixed bag, but I forged some wonderful relationships on that. But I'll say this, because it was a German-run company, when they realized that very, very few people of these drank alcohol, they came to me and they said, "We're not going to make any money. Like, what is going to happen? We're freaked out." I mean, some of these people are the types that don't even dance. It's that kind of crowd. And so I said, "Just wait till the end. Wait till the end, because on the last night they do a big plea for tips and for gratuities, and so they're freaking out that no one is making. They're not buying any alcohol, and that amounts for an enormous amount of their margin. And so on that last night, I say, listen, this is what's happened here. These folks usually are used to selling alcohol, and I just explained it. And I said, if there's any, they rely on this for their livelihood, and please be generous. And honestly, the German crew the next day when we left were weeping because the people gave that much money as gratuity, and they ended up personally taking home more money than they'd ever taken home before. And I was like, wow, that's good old Christians.
That story ended better than I thought it would, because I also know waitresses are always like, when a bunch of Christians show up, we're not getting tipped.
No, that wouldn't fit in like the Hollywood narrative of what Wheaton College is like. But it was definitely, they were unbelievably generous. They just didn't want to dance.
Yes, don't make them dance, okay?
Those are the same things I think about. And the consumer identity is a big part of, any of us who have, bumper stickers on our car, or think about, I'm a Delta customer, not an American Airlines customer. That is, I think that's a large part of people's identities. But I also feel for everyone who the shop is the last place where you can really assert some identity, some agency, and of course it's complicated. But I'm also we should pray for the service workers of all kinds, including clergy, who have been just the recipients, who have had to absorb, shall we say, the trauma and the negativity and the grief has to go somewhere.
The need,
and it has been absorbed by a lot of, I think, people who are not paid enough to absorb anything like that. So, I don't know. In fact, it bleeds into this next thing from Nadia Bolz-Weber, our friend, who wrote a fantastic newsletter the other day. If you can't take in anymore, there's a reason. And she's talking about sort of taking this psycho-spiritual pulse of the country. She says, "I just do not think our psyches were developed to hold, feel, and respond to everything coming at them right now. Every tragedy, injustice, sorrow, and natural disaster happening to every human across the entire planet in real time, every minute of every day. The human heart and spirit were developed to be able to hold, feel, and respond to any tragedy, injustice, sorrow, or natural disaster that was happening in our village. So my emotional circuit breaker keeps overloading because the hardware was built for an older time. And yet, when I check social media, it feels like there are voices saying, if you aren't talking about, doing something about, performatively posting about fill in the blank, then you are an irredeemably callous, privileged bigot who is part of the problem. And when I am someone who does actually care about human suffering and injustice, and who feels every picture I see and story I read, it leaves me feeling like absolute shit. I am left wondering, am I doing enough, sacrificing enough, giving enough, saying enough about all the horrible things right now to think of myself as a good person and subsequently silence the accusing voice in my head? The answer is always no. No, I am not. Nor could I. Because no matter what I do, the goal of enough is just as far as when I started. So I try and remember that, one, we are still living through a global pandemic, and that means the baseline of anxiety and grief is higher than ever and shared by everyone. Two, the world is on fire, literally and metaphorically. But three, I only have so much water in my bucket to help with the fires. The more exposure I have to the fires, I have no water to fight, the more likely I am to get so burned and inhale so much smoke that I cannot help anymore with the fires close enough to fight once my bucket is full again. So I try and tell myself it is okay to focus on one fire. I think, a very pastoral note to those feeling overburdened by not only the very real needs, but the edict to demonstrate how much you care about the problems in the world. And I think there is something about the increasing and widespread recognition that we're simply not built to handle this much input, especially this much sorrow. I know I'm not. Maybe you are, but
I mean, I have a great capacity for sorrow, not to brag or anything, but I'm pretty good at it. It's funny. So I posted a bit of this just because I thought it was so powerful, and kind of instantly got a DM from someone that was like, just justifying and this person's Christian, but like I think that was like the work their daughter's doing in Afghanistan. And it's like, cool, but like, is she gonna make sure my 7-year-old don't get COVID? Like, I'm just like, okay, it's like, but the point is there are so many things coming at us, and I love what she said. There are people that God charges with and calls towards working on these problems, but that can't be all of us all the time, because everyone is always basically a part of the problem, right? And I think the sooner that we accept that, it's so much like parenting, right? Like when we are like, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do this, we live in a kind of shame that then makes us really bad parents. And I mean, like we feel like we can never catch up. We're usually on edge. We take that on our kids. We're anxious. We're all these things. And I think kind of the sooner, and I loved this article for this reason, that we can accept that, like, actually we are always a part of the problem. And this thing, she says, the goal of enough is just as far away as when I started. I mean, it makes me think of that thing we talked about last spring, that like Easter is always getting closer to us, Yeah, I mean, it has just been, I'm so overwhelmed by everything. I'm so, and I mean, my life circumstances right now are overwhelming as it is, but I'm really overwhelmed for women in Afghanistan. Like, I can't stop thinking about the mothers. I just can't stop thinking about them. But I will say, it's funny, I've just been struggling with that, holding that really in a heavy way. And somewhere I saw some Amazon wish list that was like all of these things that families are going to need when they settle in Houston, because we're bringing over a lot of the refugees to Houston. And I shared it on the moms group for Josh's church, for our church. And, I mean, I don't know what to say. Sometimes I cuss. And I just said, if you're anything like me, I know you buy a lot of dumb shit on the internet. And instead of buying that jersey knit royal blue dress today, which you can still buy tomorrow, why don't you buy, it was like this list of these beautiful things that were in so many ways completely, I mean, literally foreign to us, right? Like they needed 100 packs of, and there were 3 scarves of each of headscarves,
Oh.
And I was like, this is very strange to us, but this would be like us rolling into Afghanistan with one bra. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, it was so beautiful to see these women show up. And also all of them were like, oh my gosh, I've been so overwhelmed by this too.
Wow.
And so, you know, I mean, I guess back to our last article, consumerism isn't all bad. You know, it's like, it gave us a way to kind of feel like as a Christian community of women, like we could actually do something. And for a day, which is a lot right now, I didn't feel totally hopeless about the situation.
Wow.
You know?
There's something obviously super beautiful about you buying headscarves too.
Yeah.
Which is not, you know, it's kind of the marker of how different they are from you. And,
right. But
yeah,
you know, those headscarves got to be sweaty and dirty. You know what I mean? They've been standing outside. Like they need a friend, you know, it was just,
no,
I don't know. There's something about, being together as Christians. Yeah. I don't know where it's like when, you know, when we do those things as a group, right? Like that kind of like, we can recognize both how hopeless we feel and how hopeful the gospel is in that moment.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's less personally overwhelming. Maybe I should write a piece, Dave.
I think there's something there, to be honest with you. But I didn't say that. Rutger.
There have definitely been times over the last, year and a half or however long it's been, we've been in this crazy pandemic, national reckoning with lots of different issues, where I've thought to myself, do I need to say more about what's going on nationally, internationally, you know, especially on issues of racial reconciliation and things like, you know, things like that. And I don't know, I guess I don't feel that pressure at the moment. I feel like there's enough going on in my church. Like there are enough people grieving the loss of a spouse. There are enough people who are clinically depressed. There are enough people whose children are battling alcoholism. You know, there's just more than enough in my church. And at times when there were times in the past when I think I worked out that need to feel more engaged through, like, you know, virtue signaling on social media, which was incredibly effective, and just changed lots of hearts and minds and made me feel very self-righteous all at the same time. And for the moment, at least, I don't feel terribly compelled in that direction. I think what I've thought to myself is, like, when it comes time to talk about some of those bigger systemic issues, I want to do it in community with, like, my own people, my own church, and other people in our area. Like, try to do something more locally that's more relational, that's more holistic, you know, rather than just like getting up on a Sunday morning or writing something on social media, or, you know, and the last, you know, the pandemic has not necessarily felt like a great time to forge new relationships necessarily. People have been kind of hunkered down. So yeah, I guess I'm just saying I agree with her. I feel a little more comfortable now than I have in the past with just trying to focus on what's mine to focus on and take care of the people that have been entrusted to me. And I have my own battles, you know, which I'm sure a lot of people in general, but especially a lot of professional Christians deal with, which is the work-life balance. You know, how much time am I giving to my church people versus how much time am I giving to my home people, to my family people? And that's enough of a challenge to navigate. So, and I just am not on Twitter that much, to be honest with you. I forgot my password, and I found out what it was again 2 days ago, but only so that I could see the amazing tributes that were written to a priest I know who tragically died in a car accident. First day of his sabbatical, driving his child back to college, preparing to do a pilgrimage in Spain and celebrate his 50th birthday. Amazing minister of the gospel, was killed like 20 miles, you know, outside of his hometown. I could not believe it. And I got back on Twitter just to see the outpouring of love and support and grief. But except for that, I don't know. I don't have the energy for a lot of the other stuff, to be honest with you.
I was that story Thomas Mackenzie, I think, and his daughter were killed, and it's incomprehensible and terrible.
My heart goes out to his wife, Laura, and his daughter, Sophie. And I've known Laura for a long time through youth ministry that Dave and I used to be involved with. And she also just recently lost her father like 2 weeks ago. And that's just very, very, very hard. And so it does kind of come back to what Nadia said. I feel like if you're actually engaging with the people around you, and you don't have to be leading a church or even part of a church, but if you're engaged with the people around you, I don't want to say it like, yes, we need to think about things beyond our own community, but there's a lot of suffering all around us.
Yeah, I saw the thing about Thomas, which obviously hit me in a pretty specific way, just because it's hard to imagine another family having to go through this, frankly. But I really admired Thomas for a lot of the work that he'd done. Public radio had been interviewing, I think it was like an imam, a rabbi, and then a Christian clergy person, and Thomas was that person, about how things were going during COVID. And he was so funny and genuinely self-deprecating and also really honest about how hard it was. I mean, I think he could have gotten on national public radio and been like, it's going great, and it would have made all of us be like, oh, and like he didn't, he was like, this is hard. And anyway, I did not know Thomas, but I really admired him from afar. And I mean, it is true though, that when we are connected to the people in our life that we love, that we know, and that's not just necessarily local, right? Like that, these are these people all over the place. When we lose them, it does matter a lot, and it grounds us in the brevity of life, and it grounds us in thankfulness for Thomas's ministry. I mean, I don't know. I think often when people take to the pulpit, when clergy take to the pulpit with a sort of global fix-it agenda, which is hilarious, because if you have seen a church try to do like grounds day cleanup, ain't nothing gonna happen on a global scale if these people are in charge.
Yep.
But like when you see a clergy person take to the pulpit and they're sort of like, we have to fix, universal health care, we have to fix the situation in Afghanistan, it's like, dude, you got to work that on your own time. Don't put that on these people. They're walking in here with broken hearts. Are you kidding me?
Yes.
I'm always like, you take that business elsewhere. You find a therapist and a journal and, something to hit yourself with if you're feeling that bad, because we don't need that in here. So I don't know. It always makes me very, office. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Where you can really do nothing to help people. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think what we're talking about is this overwhelming voice of the law, which is good and holy in many cases, and like thou shalt help these people.
Yes,
there is so much suffering. You can help alleviate it, but the being crushed by it without any sense of the gospel that you are a person in need of help yourself, and that being the motivating factor. I was struck by another article this week about perfectionism during the pandemic. Remember, we talked a lot about how, and I think we talked about a Tim Kreider piece where the pandemic gave people permission to say that they're sitting on their couch or they're not doing well, and that was sort of great. This is a therapist named Josh Cohen, writing for The Economist about the perfectionism trap, saying that that happened for a little while, but then perfectionism returned, and people saying like, I wanted to be the one on Slack who was seen to be the most active, and my kids were just the great exception to the home, the virtual schooling rule. And he said something interesting. He said, this return of perfectionism made me think that it might be a deep-rooted and persistent element of the human condition. After all, the Bible begins...
Might it?
The Bible begins with the fall from grace of divinely created beings into sin and mortality. From one perspective, you could say religion is an extravagant scheme for the recovery of our lost perfection, at least in its monotheistic variants. But religion also has a contrary or perhaps complementary purpose. For centuries, it was the primary means through which we came to terms with being fallen and flawed, imperfect, in short. Religious striving for moral and spiritual improvement goes in tandem with the somber recognition that perfection belongs to God alone. When mortals in the Bible, such as the architects of the Tower of Babel, attempt to usurp divine status, they are duly punished. In the religious imagination, the notion of human perfection is blasphemy. And then he sort of gets down to earth and he says perfectionism is slippery. It can grow from the soil of very different childhood experiences. The difficulty of escaping the snares of perfectionism suggests that it has a place deep in the structure of the human psyche. However we are brought up, we internalize an ideal of the person we aspire to be. Perfectionism may appear to spur us on to adult successes, but in truth, it is a fundamentally childish attitude. It imbues us with the conviction that life, in effect, ends when we give up the hope of becoming the best version of ourselves. On the contrary, that is the moment which life can finally begin. He tells an amazing story there at the end, actually, this article about a woman who's had that precise experience. So, what do you think?
I think the thing that struck me most about this is that I had never connected the dots that perfectionism is part of original sin, right? I never thought about that our need to be God, our need to be like God, that because perfectionism, we talk about it a lot, but I still think in our culture especially, and within myself, I still see it a little bit as a virtue, to be honest with you. If you're if you're shooting for the moon, you'll end up in the stars.
Shooting for the stars, you may hit the moon.
Yeah. End up at the moon, or whatever it is. Thanks for correcting me and being the antidote to my perfectionism. I appreciate that. But I think that's so helpful to think about, because I definitely have a huge perfectionist streak, and I felt for the young man that he described who did really good work. I guess in college and then getting his master's degree, but it was never good enough. And it basically was completely defeated by his own perfectionism. And I thought to myself, why have I not been only partially defeated by my perfectionism? And I also think it's because...
The jury's still out, RJ. Yep.
Right. The jury's still, that's right. I still have time to blow it. I thank you so much. But I think it's because I'm surrounded by loving people. That if I was spending all my time by myself, just trying to do the best work that I could do, trying to live up to my own standards, I might go completely insane. But to have people around me who are like, we love you, you're doing a good job. I know that I had this unending need for approval. And most of that is just because I'm insecure. But some of that is because I do think it's an antidote to my perfectionism. That when I preach a sermon that I'm like, God, that was terrible. What a huge waste of everyone's time. What a huge waste of time I am. To have my wife be like, it wasn't that bad. And to know that she means it, is helpful. Is helpful to just quiet my internal
critic,
accuser. Yeah. And so it just makes me so grateful that I'm not laboring alone, that I'm not alone in a room with my perfectionism the way that poor student was, or that Nathaniel Hawthorne short story that he describes. And what a healing place the church can be, because Jesus he meets our need. He sort of acknowledges our need for perfectionism, but then he calls us to recognize how far we're falling short, and calls us to relinquish and give up any pretense to perfection, to the temptation, the desire to be God that we hold. He calls a thing what it is, and sort of opens the door for grace and mercy.
Wow. I mean, the thing I keep thinking of, and take note, this is like the first time I've had a sports example on here, but
Whoa.
Josh Condon loves the Olympics, and I feel like they are 8 months long because he wants to watch them all the time.
He and Jamie should get together and just watch Olympics.
But I would walk through and sit down and, catch a little bit of it, get up, go do something. And I happened to be there when Tom Daley was diving. And, he's this super accomplished diver. And everyone was expecting great things. And he did a wonderful job. It was fantastic. He was competing. I think Tom Daley, I know he lives in Canada, but I think he dives for British. Yeah,
I think Tom Daley's British, yeah.
Yeah. So he was he was diving against these two Chinese divers, and they placed first and second. I think I'm getting this right, gold and silver, and he got the bronze. And they were like talking about the sort of commentators were talking about the lives of these two Chinese divers, and they were like, they describe their lives as pretty boring. They live together, they eat the same foods every day, they go to practice together, and they come home to this apartment. That's their lives. And that's how they won the gold and the silver. That. And Tom Daly was like, he really was like, no matter how this goes, I get to go home to my husband and my baby. So, and it was like such a different, beautiful, like, response to being in the Olympics, like, and like he got the bronze and he was like, this is great. Like, I mean, and I wondered, how much he may sort of quote unquote feel saved by the fact that, I mean, I don't know anybody who, I mean, people do, certainly women, but win gold medals with babies. Like, it's just like, I mean, that's expecting a lot. And it struck me as so incredible that this guy, he didn't achieve perfection, and he was okay with that because he had the tenderness of home, and what a relief that is. And I do think about how isolated we are now. Even people, we know people in their marriage who are isolated from one another, who I wonder, the more isolated we get, the louder the voice of perfection is in our lives.
Yeah. I think that's very perceptive. I would say that just along the lines of what RJ, both what you and Sarah said, that I have a very strong perfectionistic streak. I think a lot of people who are actually drawn, by the way, to law and gospel as categories, they're neurotic in the sense that they have a perfectionistic streak. That's if everyone has it. If everyone has it, well, then if you come to a Mockingbird conference, you'll find people that have it that are just, it's right on the surface. So
everyone will look perfect. They'll all be deeply neurotic.
Yes,
right.
Deeply afraid. I mean, it's
the only control we have.
Did everyone just hear RJ's inner monologue about what happens after a sermon? I was like, let's give this guy a hug. And I've listened to his sermons. They're not that bad. I mean, it's like B minus. B minus. I'm kidding.
At least I'm getting a passing grade. Praise God.
He's basically become my all-time favorite preacher in the church.
Shut up! I say that.
I was like, on the Mocking Pulpit, the podcast we have of sermons. I was like, we got to put someone else besides RJ on there because otherwise we're all going to be failing that standard. Anyway, he's going red. I would say that my perfectionist streak has not just not yielded perfection. It's I've sort of reaped the whirlwind. Like it's responsible for an enormous amount of alienation and just I don't want to overdo it, but it does not bring people closer together. It does not produce home. It produces the opposite, and it just is not like a slogan we say or that we point to a Bible verse. It's actually true. It's no fun being married to a perfectionist, and unless you really love them like Jesus loves the church, I guess. It's really it's death in a lot of ways. So Lord save me from my perfectionistic streak that is all about control and all about managing appearances and status. And I do think it predates the pandemic. It will postdate the pandemic, and it is the reason why many of us cling to the word of God's grace. That perfection is that Will Storr quote, the journalist English, he says, perfection is the idea that kills. And a lot of times I'm writing about this for
the letter that kills,
my low anthropology book, which I'm working on. Like, very few people think that human beings are actually capable of perfection. Like nobody's perfect, right? That's our slogan. And yet in practice, we believe we could all be a little more perfect than we currently are. Or we believe that other person over there is a little bit more perfect than we are. And come to find out, if you really know them, that's not true. And in fact, they're hiding behind a facade of righteousness too. But because I think that low anthropology would say not only are people not perfectible, that they're pretty, we tend to get worse as we get older.
Disastrous.
We tend to increase in our trespasses and increase in therefore our need for God, which is a beautiful thing in a lot of ways, and I think produces humility. And I was reading the words of Thomas Mackenzie's final sermon, and it's all about humility.
I want to offer just a bit of a word of mercy, though, that I received to perfectionists like myself, which is you're probably not going to get over it. It's part of it's who you are. You might chill out a little bit, but also to recognize that sometimes the parts of yourself the hardest and the most that you'd like to change are also the places where God is working and the ways in which God uses you to bless other people. I was bemoaning to someone my own kind of anxious perfectionism, and he said, "Yeah, RJ, that's true, but that's also probably one of the reasons why you're good at what you do." And that was a word of mercy and grace. And I do like for things to be more beautiful, and I like to build things. I like to do things. And I also don't want to spend the rest of my life beating myself up for ways I wish I was different that I'm probably not going to ever be different. So there's a balance there. The answer to this is not to think, well, I got to work on my perfectionism. The answer is to come to terms with yourself as you are, and just be a little bit more merciful with yourself. I think
it reminds me of that beautiful, beautiful moment in The Angel That Troubled the Waters. Remember?
Yes.
It's a 3-minute play written by Thornton Wilder.
In love service, only wounded soldiers may serve.
It is your. Without your wound, where would your power be? It is your very remorse that makes your low voice tremble into the hearts of men. The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children on earth, as can one human being broken on the wheels of living. In love service, only the wounded soldiers can serve. And RJ, I guess you're just a little more wounded than the rest of us.
He definitely is, but that is so good.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about forgiveness before we end with hearing from a bit more concretely from you, Sarah. Elizabeth Bruenig, the wonderful columnist who was writing for The Times, now writing for The Atlantic, she has been on social media. She's talked about the lack of forgiveness in our culture, and she's gotten sort of raked over the coals for it. But Sean Illig at Vox interviewed her about this. Wanted to know more of what she's talking about, but when she talks about forgiveness. And Bruenig is a Catholic and a very faithful Christian who I've tried in vain to get to speak at Mockingbird events, but that's neither here nor there.
Elizabeth, call us back.
Call me back, please.
Hit us up.
They asked her the question, why is it so hard to forgive? And this is what she said. I think it's worth trumpeting from the skies. She says, forgiveness doesn't undo the fact of the offense, nor does forgiveness suggest that the offense wasn't really that bad. So a lot of the time when you read people thinking through forgiveness, what you actually see them doing is trying to find ways to mitigate the offense. People will say, well, I wanted to forgive this person, so I took into account that they didn't really mean it, or they were young, or they were ill, etc., etc. But the truth is that forgiveness pertains to a situation in which the person is guilty and culpable. That is when the question of forgiveness actually opens. It does not open up when you have a situation where somebody is not responsible for the offense. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is when you decide to permanently forego seeking restitution or vengeance, however you want to think about it, for an offense that someone really did commit. The interviewer then says, I think a lot about forgiveness, who forgiveness is really for, and I don't have a good answer. Is it for the offender, the offended? Should we regard it less as an individual practice and more as a social virtue? That's a really important question. This is Bruenig speaking again, because a lot of resistance to the idea of forgiveness arises from the fact that it's often sold as a kind of self-help practice. Oh, someone hurt you and you're still traumatized by it. All you need to do is forgive them and then you'll feel better about it and you can let go and move on. That's just not true. And I don't think it takes much experience in that realm to realize that forgiving someone and letting go of your right to pursue some kind of recompense from them doesn't feel amazing. It can oftentimes be, in its own way, another layer of pain. It's certainly not something you do for your own pleasure or your own health. The person doing the forgiving isn't getting a lot of bang for their buck. The person who benefits way out of proportion to what they've done is the offender. But that raises an important point. Forgiveness is not deserved by definition. It's not something somebody earns. It's something that's freely given. And so Illig then asked the obvious question, well, has the internet then just made us worse, less forgiving people? Has the world we've built, the digital world, supercharged by so many of our pathologies, like the will to punish and humiliate, has it been so supercharged that an act of forgiveness takes some kind of heroic effort? And then she says this. She says, I definitely think that the internet is very good at inflaming our worst tendencies. And one of those is the tendency to discipline and punish and prosecute, not for safety, not for the preservation of community, but just for fun. At the same time, I don't think people have ever been especially forgiving. I don't think we need to be too down on ourselves because I think it's just a perennially difficult thing. I look back at late antiquity and the early medieval period and the stuff I studied in grad school, and those are definitely not what I'd call an especially merciful time or a forgiving people. They knew it was important, they thought about it, they wrote about it, it was a virtue on their minds. But in just looking how society played out, it was something that, to borrow from Updike, was on their minds much more than on their schedules. I think this is a very important contribution because a lot of times when I hear people talking about forgiveness, they think, well, you're telling me what happened didn't really matter, or that or that I need to do it in order to heal. And that can almost be abusive, I think, in the way that that's wheeled out against people. But she's saying that it's not something you do to make yourself feel better, and neither is it something that it can be made smaller. In fact, it makes the infraction worse. It doesn't say what happened to you isn't terrible. It says what happened to you is so bad that the only answer is some sort of supernatural form of forgiveness.
Well, see, and Dave, supernatural. Well, we rewatched Ted Lasso season 1 recently, And at the end, towards the end of that season, there's a moment of profound forgiveness where one character has been actively sabotaging and backstabbing another the entire time. And she finally comes clean. And the person she's wronged says, I forgive you, right? Which is the last thing in the world she's expecting. But then he goes on to say, he talks about divorce, because both characters have been through divorce, and he says divorce will make you do crazy things, and you're just not yourself. So it is a way of explaining this terrible behavior that she's engaged in, and it makes me wonder in my own life, have I ever actually been able to forgive anyone who really wronged me without looking at them and saying, I can understand why, given where they came from and who they are and their upbringing or whatever it might be, why they would have done something like this? And does that mean it ceases to be forgiveness? Like, have I ever just really actually just up and forgiven someone without any rationalization or justification or anything? And is that even possible, humanly speaking, or is that only a divine prerogative? I forget that people have wronged me all the time, okay, not really, not that people really wronged me.
I was like, I got a book, we can pull it out.
It's great when you owe RJ money.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding.
I don't know. Do you feel like, is it possible to actually just forgive someone else without any rationalization? Or, I've often said this is one of the reasons why it's very helpful not to believe in free will, because you can look at the really messed up things that other people do and the things that you do and say, well, it doesn't say that it didn't hurt. It doesn't say that it wasn't wrong. It doesn't say that you're not somehow culpable for it, but it does a little bit allow you to have compassion on yourself and other people when they do really awful things. What do you guys think?
What do you think?
I mean, it's a complicated subject for me right now just because of the way that my parents died and that it wasn't their fault. That it, in many ways, was the fault of other people. And I think one of the more merciful things in my life, the most merciful thing in my life has been that I somehow, for some reason, by God's great mercy, don't wake up really angry every day at the people who were responsible. Yeah. I mean, I think, and I think for legal reasons, I'm not sure those people would ever ask for our forgiveness. But they don't have to, because I've already forgiven them. And also I don't even know if that's the right words. Like, the thing that's interesting to me about forgiveness is I think like literally almost all of the time when people have done something and wronged us, it's been so accidental and there's rarely real malice behind it. And I think that like their deep woundedness, sure, maybe that has caused them to do something to trespass, but not like organized malice. Like, I just think that's very rare. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, RJ. I mean, I kind of don't really agree with Elizabeth. Still, you please, Miss Bronig, come to Mockingbird. But I actually think it is maybe the closest human beings can get to forgiveness, that we do have these reasons around it, right? That we are able. I mean, that's a really beautiful. Like, that honestly, the other thing I keep thinking is I wouldn't have the capacity to forgive the way I forgive if I weren't Christian. I don't know. Those two things, like when people are like, well, how can you forgive them? Or how can you not be angry at them? Or how can you, it's like, well, I mean, I mean, God took that away from me. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, it's such a complicated thing because it's so hard to talk about it in the abstract and not like think of it personally. But I think it's funny, most of the time when people really do these terrible things, they're doing them because on some level, they think they're actually doing something good.
Dave, you're exactly right. And you're right. No one is as dangerous as someone who's convinced that they're in the right and acting for the benefit of others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is certain about it.
Yeah.
Or
like,
certain,
like you get in the pulpit
yes.
and you say to all the exhausted people who've shown up at your church that today's the day they're going to fix, the welfare state.
I mean, I think it's a really important reminder that it's not just 2021 that's merciless. It's always human beings are merciless with one another. We are much more drawn to revenge than to mercy, and it's our default setting. It comes so naturally when someone has hurt us, and when someone has not just cut us off in traffic, but just
Well. Yeah,
RJ, what are you thinking right now? I could tell you're processing.
I would just think that maybe the answer to all this is we're just human beings, right? Mm-hmm. We're not God. We're not, and we do the best we can to forgive the people in our lives that have wronged us and to forgive ourselves, and whatever mechanisms we need to do that, humanly speaking, we do it. And then we just wait for God's forgiveness to show up.
Yeah.
Whether temporarily. And we know it's going to show up eternally. And like you said, Sarah, sometimes you just, in that beautiful Stephen Colbert way, you wake up and you realize that you're thankful for the thing you most wish hadn't happened.
Right.
But it's not a human work. It is a divine work.
No.
And so to try to, talk about how you forgive, really truly forgive wholly with your whole heart without any explanation or rationalization is maybe just a fool's errand, and you just wait for it to be manifest.
Well, this is clearly a topic that we all have a lot to say about, because I think that the command to forgive is another one of these commands that I sign on to. And yet I know that yelling at people they need to forgive other people is never going to produce. That's the law. The law is you must forgive so-and-so. The gospel is you have been forgiven.
Yes.
And in cases of abuse, for example,
even in your unforgiveness.
In abuse, how many times have I heard it's especially women say that they've been told by pastors that they have to forgive their abuser. And that's a way to kind of, there may be even a noble intention behind that, an attempt to sort of force some sort of healing, but it is in that
not how it
situation,
works.
it's not necessarily for them to do. Like God can
Right.
forgive that person, and maybe I can have faith
Right.
that God can forgive that person. But it's not. Let us never forget that the command to forgive, as beautiful and hopeful as it is, and as much as it creates second chances for people, and everyone basically needs not just a second chance, but a gazillion chances. It is still
70
the
times
law,
7.
and it is still.
Yeah.
Yes. Jesus is here to proclaim forgiveness of us, and that's a starting point for any kind of further forgiveness. And you may never get there. You may never say, you know what, I'm never going to forgive the person that did this to me, and that's in God's hands, and I just am going to leave it at there because that's all I can do, and I think that's okay. That person is no less trusting in God. If anything, they might be more trusting in the Lord to deal with what they cannot do. I mean, I also know in my life, there have been people that I feel like I have forgiven for hurting me in certain ways. But I also know it's not like a one-time thing. Sometimes it's like then you have a memory of something and you're hurt again, and forgiveness, again, to the type we're talking about at the heart of the Christian faith, is really divine. It is God's forgiveness.
It's final.
Because
Yes.
if you've ever been in any kind of relationship, you know that forgiveness isn't you can't just do it once. It's sort of a state of being, and yet something we at the marriage service, at least in the Episcopal Church, we pray for. We pray in the marriage service that that forgiveness would be present, because we know that it can't be present on our own steam and our own volition. Well, along those lines, I know I hope that's not too intense, but here we go. Sarah, you wrote something.
We try to keep it light here on the Mocking Cast.
Sarah, you wrote something extremely powerful about an experience you had this summer, and I was hoping maybe you could just relate it, and I can read a little bit from your piece, but why not just hear from you directly if you're willing to share?
Sure. This summer we were sort of headed towards leaving Mississippi. Josh had already gone home, and I had the morning to myself, so I went and walked around downtown, and I went into St. Peter's Episcopal Church there on the square, which was my church during college, and a really life-changing place for me in a lot of ways. It's funny being a priest's wife, even at a church. I don't know if there's ever been a priest's wife who's loved a church as much as I love Holy Spirit.
Oh.
And yet, it is still a place where I feel a little bit on display, and it is still hard to fall apart there, honestly. And I have said that to dear people who I love who go there. It's just, there's something about it that, and I would have told you I could have fallen apart right before this happened, but I have learned that I cannot. And so, anyway, I can fall apart at St. Peter's on the Square in Oxford, and I could feel this wave of grief coming, and I walked into the church and no one was there. And I was thinking about Paul Zoll and how he talks about how we often function as though real healing can't happen in churches. I think a lot of churches act like real healing can't happen in churches. And I looked to the stained glass window tomorrow, which is a really old stained glass window, and it said, "Blessed are the brokenhearted." And I was like, that's a weird translation. And also I thought, like, what a funny thing to put on a window. Like, you would never, like, RJ, you will never like run a capital campaign for new stained glass windows. You're like, this is what we're gonna put, blessed are the brokenhearted. Like, nobody gives money to that. And so I closed my eyes and just got this beautiful vision of both of my parents arriving in heaven. And they were greeted by both of their parents. And that would have never happened in my mother's lifetime, and probably wouldn't have happened in my father's, just in this deeply like biblical, like return of the prodigal child kind of embraced by their parents. And, for the first time I had a lot of peace about where they were, which was initially, and I probably had conversations with both of you about it, but very difficult for me because I had just been with my parents a week and a half before they died. And so when everyone's like, oh, they're in heaven, I was like, I don't even know what that means. I can't even like wrap my brain around that. So I got this real piece of where they were. And then I heard a noise in the church that made me jump. And I opened my eyes and I looked to the right of the window, and it actually says, "Blessed are the pure in heart." And it was so jarring that I closed my eyes again and looked again to see if it was like a window that like flipped or something. And it wasn't. Like, I realized in that moment that God had just given me, the first thought I had was like, shit, this is like when the Mary statue cries. Like, it was like purely of God. It was purely a vision. It was like all of those things. And, yeah, and then I called Dave and cried on the phone for a while, but I did, from the church. And there was a huge rainstorm that hit like right at the same time. It was really kind of a crazy, crazy thing, but yeah, such a gift. I mean, I genuinely, I say this in the piece, but I didn't cry for probably 3 weeks afterwards. It was I got so much peace from just knowing that they're okay, you know?
Can I read something you wrote,
Sure.
some part of that you wrote about it? Because, when you called me, that was, it was one of these classic things where, the weakness is where God is, not just in your life, but in mine as well. Like, I was not feeling great about a variety of things. And that call just was such a lightning bolt of grace. You wrote this. You said, I went so long, you write, I did not cry for 3 weeks after this happened. I went so long without sobbing, it was almost alarming. My prayers have changed from pleading with God for understanding to telling God to let my parents know that we are okay. Because I know finally that they are okay. Then you write this, life is one brutal lesson in learning that nothing is linear. Not childhood, not parenting, not marriage, not sanctification, and definitely not grief. But it is not shapeless either. So much of my loss and failed ambitions are really just cross-shaped, where the purity of God's love meets the brokenness of my heart again and again and again. Healing never happens the way we want to. It can't.
Yeah. It's funny, after I had this experience, my mom's best friend, who, Dave, you were at their funeral, she told me she had this dream about my mom that, we had my brother's shower for his wedding 2 weekends ago. And, they're so beautiful and young, my brother and future sister-in-law. And I just walked in and sort of burst into tears because, they were so beautiful and I'm so proud of them. And yet there are these people who are not there. And my mom's best friend, who my mom was on the way to visit when she died. My parents were on the way to visit my mom's best friend and her stepdad. And she came over to me and she said, your mom came to me in a dream this week. And she told me she wants me to hug both of her children. Because they can't be here. And the world is so hard right now and things feel so heavy. And I told Josh this week, I said, I'm either I'm going to be old and I'll look around at all the world's problems and think, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we could solve those problems. Or I'm just like, we're all going to live in a hovel together and the children are going to be with us and I'm going to be wearing a babooshka all the time. And, I think that there's comfort in both of those visions for me. There is comfort in knowing that the space between here and where my parents is not impenetrable. And that I'm promised that I will get to go there, and that they will embrace me. And there's, even though this is an incredibly hard time era to be raising children in, there was also something in that vision for me that was like, but you have been given these people to love and to mother. So yeah, I mean, I'm just thankful for Mockingbird because I can write this stuff down. I was like, this is the most Protestant version of the Mary statue thing ever.
A broken heart is a pure heart, you write.
Yeah. I mean, that was like, the pure thing was so weird because I don't like that word,
Pure.
I mean,
Yeah.
you want to talk about like, perfection, like purity those are kind of the same in my mind. And especially as a woman, like it's like, ooh, that ship sailed, and that was like Josh said to me, because I was like wrestling with that. I was like, I don't understand why it said, the thing about a pure heart. And he was like, well, a broken heart is a pure heart. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. So, it's just a lot of hard stuff and a lot to be thankful for.
RJ, any response?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna Bible nerd for a sec.
Please.
But I have always found that beatitude to be a bit jarring, right? Because you get to Matthew chapter 5 and it's this litany of brokenness, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. But then suddenly, you're right. I've always had a difficulty with the next one being blessed are the pure in heart. It's like one of these things is not like the other. It doesn't feel right to me. But yeah, when you said that, it just made me think of Psalm 51. As David is lamenting his being caught at having committed adultery with Bathsheba, and Psalm 51:17 is the sacrifice of God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart you will not despise. And I think I'll never think about that beatitude the same way, because you're right, sir. I think about purity the same way. It's like the beatitudes like weakness, hunger, brokenness, and then all of a sudden purity. It's like, well, maybe a pure heart is a broken heart because God's heart is broken for the world and for us. And if we have that same broken heart, then we have God's heart, which is a helpful thought right now, because there's a lot to be brokenhearted about out there, and
doesn't it feel like you could be an old man wearing a babooshka?
I thought babooshka. What is a babooshka?
It's the thing you tie around your head under your chin.
I thought that was the Russian word for grandma. Is that the same thing?
I mean, I could end up there. Yes.
All right, you could. You're just like, when I think Tolstoy novel, I think you.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Right in the wheelhouse.
Right in the wheel, totally.
Garrison Keillor said something like, when I was a young man, I thought I was going to be famous, but it turns out I'm just an old man that sits in the dirt,
He's famous, just not why he thought he would be.
Oh, God.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, I think there's what other place to end is there than that God's heart is broken, and to have a broken heart is to be close to God's heart. Yeah, I got. That's about how. What's a better way to go into a bustling fall than with a broken heart? Because that's where the light gets in, as they say. I think. Well, it's certainly where it's gotten in today. So thank you, both of you, for getting on, for being yourselves.
Missed you guys.
Really missed you. I've missed this, actually. I kind of need it.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in a few weeks. So,
yep.
Blessings to you. Bye.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.